Every morning, Bob wakes up at 6:30 in the morning to get ready for work. As he dresses, eats, and does his chores, he watches the early morning news. After this quick update, he'll hop in his car and head off to work. During his lunch break at work, he watches whatever happens to be on the big screen TV while he eats his meal. Once he gets home, usually after finishing whatever project he was working on that day, he turns on his favorite TV show and eats dinner. After his show, dinner, and usually dessert, he flips through the channels until he finds a show that he can doze off to, until he finally decides to go to bed. Almost every home in America has at least one TV, if not more. Nationwide, families gather around the TV to watch a show that entertains them and helps them to either escape reality or to better understand it. Such shows as The Simpsons and New Amsterdam, which is a new show on Fox, do not necessarily help us make sense of reality, but they do still bring us entertainment. The Simpsons has too many impossibilities to help us make sense of reality, such as when aliens come down to Earth and impersonate Bill Clinton and Bob Dole in order to take over America, which they then succeed to do. In New Amsterdam is about a 400-year-old police officer who is immortal due to an Indian curse put on him after he was resurrected that makes him immortal until he finds his one and only true love. Now, both of these shows are a bit unrealistic, but they do bring us entertainment in areas such as comedy, characters, and their story. These three elements, along with how the TV show draws our emotions, its intelligence, how it leaves the viewer satisfied, and its morals, are the elements that make up the TV show. Leave It to Beaver has a very constant plot line in each episode that might consist of something like this. Beaver Cleaver and Larry Mondello decide that it would be interesting to smoke coffee out of an antique pipe. They do smoke coffee out of an antique pipe. Once Larry's mother begins noticing stains on her antique pipe, she asks Larry, who promptly denies knowing anything about it. Towards the end of the episode, Beaver realizes that what they did was wrong and confesses. The Simpsons, on the other hand, has no constant plot line throughout the show. And an episode of The Simpsons might start off with Lisa Simpson trying to win the science fair by growing a certain bacteria on her recently lost tooth. The episode will end with Lisa becoming the supreme lord over the technologically advanced city on the tooth. Although this is comedic, it is too loose of a plot line. Another type of plot line is the type of plot line that the show Lost follows, which is over the whole series, in which the victims of the plane crash are trying to figure out how to get off the island, as well as what in the world is going on the island. The characters are possibly the most important part of a TV show. The show, early edition, has good characters who are strong and are not fake in any way. Gary Hobson is a man who gets tomorrow's newspaper today. He's as normal as any man who gets tomorrow's newspaper today. He struggles with his job and his social life, as well as having to save the lives of many Chicago citizens. He has a very close friend named Marissa, who is blind. She is also a believer and encourages him and occasionally brings up deep theological issues. Gary also has family struggles, especially when his dad tries to take over the saving lives business. The new show, Psych, has a very loose plot line, however. The main character, Sean, spends his time annoying the police officers by pretending to be psychic and joking around with his partner, Gus. Also, the police officer, Lassiter, does not take his job seriously at all, but nevertheless remains on the police force. If the characters of a TV show are written well, they will naturally draw our emotions. This means that they simply make us feel sympathy or empathy for the character or characters in a given situation. In the show New Amsterdam, the main character, the 400-year-old officer John Amsterdam, cannot be completely honest with all of his friends due to this friends can usually tell that he is hiding some big secret. His girlfriend, Sarah, who's a doctor, threatens to break off their relationship if he does not tell her this big secret. He then tells her that he is 400 years old, and she then walks away in grief and disbelief. We, the omniscient viewer, know of his problem and can feel for him because there was simply nothing he could do about it. The show House tries often to make us feel for the characters, but due to the immoral lives that the characters lead, many times you just can't simply feel sorry for them. Comedy, although it is not essential in a TV show, when it is used, it must be appropriate in its language, content, and attitude. The show Early Edition has very few swear words in a couple episodes. However, Family Guy has very objectionable and vulgar themes in almost every episode. The Simpsons has achieved a sort of middle ground and is occasionally very clean, but is also occasionally not very clean. A show's intelligence usually refers to police or detective shows. This simply means that the mystery or the crime committed is not something too simple, but is also still realistic. The show Law & Order presents very simple crimes in which they show the crime, they find the criminal, and then prosecute the criminal. The show Psych, which I mentioned earlier, has very complex and usually realistic mysteries. In one episode, a famous athlete is murdered. The police jump to the athlete's known stalker, but Sean, the main character, further investigates what is going on. He realizes that the shadows and the evidence photographs do not match up, and that the only person who could have done anything about this was the evidence photographer on the police force, who, after even more further investigation, is shown to have had a relationship with the athlete. A show must leave the viewer satisfied at the end. Otherwise, for the viewer, it will be a complete waste of time. If a show starts out with basically no plot line and continues that throughout the episode, that will leave the viewer unsatisfied. The viewer will also be unsatisfied if the show leads one direction the whole episode, but at the end takes a completely different route. Law & Order often displays the criminal and the crime, but at the end of the episode, the criminal gets off with a deal or maybe even scot-free. Why is it important that we know the elements of a TV show and what makes up a TV show? If we know the elements of a TV show, we can be wise on what we decide to watch. There are some shows that are worth watching, some shows that are a complete waste of our time, and some shows that are in the middle somewhere that are not a complete waste of time, but are still worthwhile to watch. Using these elements, we can help ourselves not to waste our time with the TV, and also help the TV shows that we do decide to watch to be good for us somehow. Are there any shows that display all of these elements? Yes, and the show Monk is one of these shows. It displays all of these elements, and it displays them all very well. Monk is not necessarily the best TV show, because I haven't seen every TV show, but in the best category of TV shows, those worth watching, it definitely fits in there pretty high up. Monk definitely has comedy. Most of the comedy is based off Adrian Monk's phobias and obsessive-compulsive tendencies, and how these interact with the story and the other characters. This might be something as small as Sharona licking her chess pieces so that Monk will not capture them, to Monk surviving in Mexico for 3 days without drinking any water because no store carries his brand, Sierra Springs, in which case when he gets home he buys 1,000 bottles of Sierra Springs water just in case of emergency. They also play off Sharona's boyfriend issue and how Monk can always see through the boyfriend when he tries to impress her. In one episode, Sharona dates the Godfather's nephew, Fat Tony, who is a hitman for the mafia. Sharona jokes around that Monk cannot ruin this relationship because we already know that he's a bad guy. The characters in Monk are also written very well. Adrian Monk, who already suffered from phobias and obsessive-compulsive tendencies, joined the San Francisco Police Department. He was married to his wife for 7 years, his wife died in a car bomb in a parking garage. After this, Monk's phobias and obsessive-compulsive tendencies grew astronomically, and he was given a psychological discharge from the police department. After living in his house and never leaving for 3 years, his good friend Captain Leland Stottlemyre, one of his former partners, hires a nurse for him to help him get through his phobias and OCD tendencies. Sharona Fleming becomes his nurse. She has a son named Benji, and she and her son moved from New Jersey to San Francisco due to her husband's continual drinking problem. She becomes his nurse and assistant/partner. Monk then, after this nurse and learns to cope with life, he becomes a private consultant for the police department. Captain Leland Stottlemyre despises Monk because he is so much better than himself, but grows to respect Monk. In one episode, Monk is assumed to be dead, and the captain argues for Monk to get a white glove funeral, which is the highest honor and only for those officers currently on the force. Monk also draws emotion, usually using Trudy, Monk's former wife. In Mr. Monk versus the Cobra, Monk is buried alive. He becomes unconscious due to the lack of oxygen and has a vision of him and Trudy walking in the park, talking. When they do finally find him and dig him up and open the coffin, Monk is smiling, which is a rare occurrence even when he is conscious. And Mr. Monk takes his medicine. Monk begins taking a drug that will make him normal. The character that Monk becomes in this episode is an obnoxious character that no one can stand to be around. Monk realizes that this is not himself, especially when he can no longer smell Trudy on her old pillow. Monk also has a very strong plotline and uses intelligence very well. Every episode, Monk has to get over his fears and use his pure genius in some way to solve the crime. Monk once solves the crime of a judge who was murdered by, according to all the evidence, a 1,200-pound man who cannot even get out of his bed. He also solves the murder of a woman who was sent a mail bomb by her brother, who was currently in a coma. Also, over the series, Monk gathers clues to his wife's murder and is slowly putting together the pieces to find the criminal and the one and only unsolved case of his. Morally, the worst thing that Monk has is a few swear words and a few rare suggestive themes, the worst of them being in the episode Mr. Monk Meets the Playboy. However, these bad elements are countered by the good elements that the show contains. For instance, everyone learns the consequences of their actions, whether it be the criminal who murdered somebody, or even Sharona, who occasionally tries to lie to her mom in some way. Monk also leaves the viewer satisfied at the end of each episode by wrapping up the case and whatever problems the characters were having during that episode. Now, do all of these elements in Monk apply to all types of audiences? Yes, they do. If Monk, no matter whether it be physical comedy, stupid comedy, serious comedy, Monk has it. Mr. Monk and the Black House is an episode where Monk gets a date and they then have to walk up 52 flights of stairs on this date because Monk is afraid of elevators. Lieutenant Disher is sort of the officer who never knows what's going on and always makes a fool of himself. In the episode of the 1,200-pound murderer, he comes up with the theory that perhaps the man got a liposuction before committing the crime and then a reverse liposuction after committing the crime. Monk also brings comedy through his random and endless knowledge of the oddest things you can imagine. Also, Monk draws emotion from all types of audiences, whether it be through Trudy, Monk, and his problems, or possibly the victim of the crime committed. Now, Bob, who I talked about in my opening story, does watch too much TV and definitely needs to get a hobby. But some of the TV that he does watch is good and is worth watching, like Monk is, such as the news he watches in the morning and possibly his favorite TV show during dinner time. So as Monk would say, unless I'm wrong, which, I'm not, of all the TV shows, Monk is definitely one worth watching, and of all of those worth watching, Monk is one of the best.
Over. Start giving
Let's give
signs.
another hand, people. Let's give another hand. All right, who's got questions for
You
Jay?
can announce it for us.
Okay, after. Sorry, I asked you to remind me.
It wasn't perhaps not a problem in your argument, but I noticed that you focused primarily on the earlier episodes, only those with Sharona.
Yes, I did. I mainly left Natalie out because I thought that it might make it too complicated to have to explain both characters and why one left and the other one, and because they do have different backgrounds and everything. And also, I think Sharona is a better example of some of the points I made. Well, Natalie does draw emotion and has comedy, but I think Sharona is a better example of those elements.
Why does Sharona leave? I've never seen that episode.
Well, Sharona, in the story, Sharona gets remarried to her husband in New Jersey, who apparently overcomes the drinking problem, and moves back to New Jersey with her son Benji. They have to explain this in one episode because the actor quit, so there's not an actual goodbye episode. There's an episode she's there and she's there. Mr. Monk takes his medicine, Mr. Monk does.
You were talking about the morals involved in a show, and I guess I've seen more movies and shows, so I'm going to use that as an example. I guess there's one movie I saw that had great morals. The bad guys are definitely the bad guys, the good guys are definitely the good guys. I mean, it's not like somebody doesn't do something terrible and then, get portrayed as a good guy. And so then later I'm, casually perusing the box, I'm like, whoa, it's R-rated. So I guess, and there's another movie I saw called Heroes, not the TV show, and it was very elegant, very cool looking. I mean, it was a great movie, but the theme was kind of messed up. So, what do you think it's more about content, or do you think it's more about how good and bad is portrayed?
I think one thing is content, especially depending on the viewer. Child, you definitely don't want to watch something R-rated. But it is also how it is portrayed, and that's sort of what I mentioned the attitude. I didn't really explain it, but how the content is portrayed. I mean, if the good guys are leading completely immoralized and get away with it, that's obviously not portraying it very well. But if it's the bad guys who have to immoralize and suffer the consequences from it, I think that in some ways the good of seeing the consequences for their actions outweighs the content. I mean, also sort of depending on the content, especially if the show's very explicit, it might not be worth it. but I think if it's not too explicit and you know what's going on and you see the consequences, then it outweighs, the good outweighs the bad. That answers your question.
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned in your little like opening and closing narratives about that this Bob guy is watching too much TV, and I think there are definitely people who say like you shouldn't watch any TV, and then there are people who watch TV all the time and don't have any problem with it. What would you say that there's like, what would you say about watching TV as a hobby or way to spend your time, and also is it like, if it is worthwhile, is that because it's entertainment or because it's some kind of like cultural art form? You may split that into two.
Yeah.
It is, like, what would you say about how much time we spend watching TV and?
I think that you can definitely spend too much time watching TV. I don't know if you necessarily spend too little time watching TV, because it's not necessary to life. But, I think that watching some TV is okay, but not all of the time. I mean, for example, Bob at lunch could have been, I don't know, conversing with coworkers, or when he's home, he could have been doing something to help himself, or maybe help someone else, even working on something. But I think that the good times that he did take to watch TV are good times because they were worth watching, and if he hadn't spent all the time watching TV, then just watching it during those times would have made his amount of TV time okay.
Yeah. So, you kind of like that there's value in watching a certain amount of TV if it's like worthwhile TV, and do you think then that there's worthwhile TV, I mean not obviously all the junk shows out there, but do you think that worthwhile TV making is a kind of art? Is that an art form?
I think so, because it definitely requires writing skills to write a TV show. But it also requires you to be able to use all of these elements to write well.
It's not over yet.
I don't know, they canceled the show.
Oh, they did?
I think so.
Yeah, no one was watching
And not
because it
probably
was very good.
Elvis specifically.
But
It's not on right now. It's on for like 5 weeks. So we left wondering whether or not this Sarah person was just doing it.
Could it be a possibility that Sheila died, like,
Yeah, so Alan wonders that. They said there's only one person in the world who's your true love. So.
What if you miss her?
What if she like lives in Zimbabwe or something?
You talked about how good shows should like really be satisfied and wrap things up, but I know with something like Lost, the episodes often leave you hanging. So is that necessary to a good show to wrap things up, or?
One thing with Lost is it's as I said, it's a series plot line. So I'm hoping that at the end of the series they will wrap things up. But a show like Monk and most other shows are sort of episode shows. They go by episode. So I think a show that goes by episode does need to wrap it up, unless they're doing a double episode. But does need to wrap up things at the end of the episode to leave them in satisfied.
How do you feel about reality TV shows like Idol or something?
I don't know mine.
Okay,
how
like,
about White Spot?
I haven't really watched it, but I really want to watch it. I think it's a waste of time.
do you usually think that reality TV shows are like that, like Survivor or something?
I think
It's
most,
been going on for
I think
13
most
years
of
now.
it, because there's not really any sort of quality gotten out of watching it. I mean, you may laugh at some things that happen, but it doesn't help you see. I was trapped on an island, like they do in Survivor, and I had all these tasks to do, and I don't think it helps you with that.
So Lost would be better if you were trapped on an island.
Yeah. more.
You never know, you
Run
can
around with
run
guns, shoot people, go for it.
Run,
Does someone know when I'm abortion?
Huh?
Does someone know when
They don't shoot a lot.
Did you come across any, criticism of the show or about, how they treated the OCD? It's fascinating to me. He is a very extreme case, of course, but then you're so excited that he's become functional. But it's pretty interesting that they, to me, they treat it very intelligently, honest, and can educate the public about it without, making it seem like they're mocking or being ugly about it, and treating him with respect. But I didn't know if people who had problems had been offended or anything.
I haven't really heard any people having serious problems. I think there may have been an episode, where they did play on his OCD a little too much to where it could have been taken mockingly. But I can only think of that one instance if I can.
I personally have been very offended by the reaction.
But I don't think I think they do it intelligently well. I haven't heard anything complaints. Does that answer?
I agree.
Jay, let me first say, you did a really good job of setting up, explaining clearly the criteria for good TV, and then explaining how monk fits into that. That's the nicest way to argue. However, in arguing that way, you might get someone who says, I don't agree with that criteria. And so, can you defend a little bit or explain a little bit why you chose, you talked about characters, plot lines, satisfaction, a degree of treating morality in a way that's appropriate, but you could easily imagine someone who says, look, TV's just entertainment, and what I want is something thrilling, or what I want is something sensationalized, or what I want is some kind of escape. And so, really, I don't necessarily, someone may not agree with those things, or, and whether they do or not, what I'd like to hear from you is, why do you feel compelled to use those criteria as what makes for good television? What about those makes them good, or makes them work for good television?
One thing is the elements that I chose, they were comedy, the characters, the plot line, the story, emotion, intelligence, satisfaction, and morality. They all sort of play into each other. If you have a moral character that's written well, that will draw emotion. Comedy, I mentioned, is not essential, but I think that it definitely, it's not essential, but it definitely is something that makes a TV show great. I mentioned 3 sort of categories, those worth watching, those TV shows that are a waste of time, and sort of the other ones that are in the middle that are not a waste of time completely, but are not completely worth their while.
But what makes these categories the best ones to look at?
The elements.
Yeah, the elements that you talk about.
Um,
Why did you choose those when there are other things you could have talked about, or other ways that you could have described them?
I think that these were the necessary, I think there are more elements to this TV show, but I think these are the necessary elements because every TV show pretty much has these, most TV shows have these in some way, and those that don't usually are canceled or something, so we don't really see this. But I chose these elements because they are in the most popular TV shows, and also for morals and things, I think they sort of follow the Christian view, because the Christian view, we're not going to approve of something that teaches immorality in some way. Am I getting any-
Yeah, you are. Let me ask you a more pointed question. Do you think that, kind of, in line with Emily's question about reality television, do you think that the elements that you chose, and I think you're right about the fact that almost all television has these to some degree or another, do you think that those elements are in line with perhaps the best of what it means to be human in a way that it seems to me that some reality shows demean what it means to be human or point out, people at their worst, silliness, or get you to laugh at someone who does something that is unthinkable. Do you think that these elements and that Monk embodying these elements, maybe it's kind of a softball question where you just kind of say yes, but do you think can you elaborate on how they might help us to act more like real human beings instead of like idiots?
I think one part is the characters and how they're written and how they portray them. As Ms. Barnes mentioned, the OCD, how they use Monk's obsessive compulsiveness in the show. It sort of helps us. It helps some people to become aware of that problem and how to sort of deal with it. Because there are definitely wrong ways to deal with obsessive compulsive, which you can see in the TV show. But you're asking how it helps us to.
I mean, it seems like a show like Survivor or a movie like Jackass helps you laugh at people at their worst in a way that. But do you think a show like Monk helps you? Not to be schmaltzy about it, but does it help you celebrate humanity even with its idiosyncrasies, like an OCD phenomenon? Does it help you to kind of celebrate humanity or appreciate humanity, or in even a small way, not that this makes you a better person, but does it make you want to interact with people in ways that are more human than a movie like Jackass or a show like Survivor?
Yes. Yeah, I do think it does definitely help us to see this human aspect. But reality TV shows definitely do play on people's mistakes or stupidity, which is not productive in this human aspect. So yes, I do think Monk definitely helps us to see this, and it's just through the characters, how they're written and how they are portrayed, I think is how it helps to do this.
Yeah. Good.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Other questions? Thank you, Jay.